Um, that's just so anybody who misses a session can catch up watching the recording, or maybe if you wanted to go back to a certain point in the session to review what was said, you can check back. So those will be all made available to you fairly shortly after the session. And Emma and Max are going to explain all about how you can access all of this stuff and other information as we go. But so my name's Ken Beer. I'm the Principal Engineer at Safe System Solutions. I see some familiar names on the list there. So hello to my friends there that I know, and lovely to meet you to those that I don't know. We are a road safety engineering consultancy. We're based in Melbourne, but we work across Australia and New Zealand on different projects, and we have a real passion for capacity and capability development and sharing knowledge and getting people skilled up in different areas. And we're really excited to be running this cycling infrastructure course. It's something that we are super passionate about, cycling safety and providing the best for cyclists, partly because we're all cyclists, but also because it's a great form of transport, and we don't need to go into that in a lot of detail. But we do want to thank the Road Safety Advisory Council of Tasmania for their support of this session, and Bicycle Network, and particularly Alison there for all of her help with this and pushing it along. And we're really excited to be running this. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many different lands on which people are logging into this training, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'm not going to have too much more involvement in today's session. I might pop back in and out, but I'll introduce the other two people you can probably see on your screen there. We've got Emma on the screen there, and there's Emma giving a wave. Emma is a training coordinator at Safe System Solutions, and she's going to be the moderator, facilitator of the course, and help with any admin, any logistics, any sort of questions as you go. She'll be behind the scenes monitoring the chat and feeding the info through to Max so he can answer any questions that you've got. And Max McArdle is going to be your lead trainer. Max is a senior engineer at Safe System Solutions and has worked for the Victorian government, for private construction firms, worked internationally on a variety of projects, and now is our sort of specialist bicycle infrastructure go-to person. And so Max has been working hard to develop a whole lot of resources and slides and information and activities for you for this session. And yeah, so I'm quite excited. I'm going to hand over now. I think, Max, you're probably going to put some slides up. And then
I might share my screen.
Yeah, and there's going to be a bit of an explanation about how you talk and how you communicate, and putting your hand up and Moodle and all those good things. But hope you enjoy the course. Over to you, Max.
Thank you, Ken. We are already experiencing a little technical difficulty, as it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Emma, I'm not sure if that's an issue that's come up before.
Oh, okay.
I got it.
Oh, Ken's on top of this.
Okay, that should work now.
Yes, it has. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay. So. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the screen. Would you be able to just confirm, Emma, that the full presentation is up and not the notes side?
We've got the notes side, Max. So just go up to display settings, up the top.
Yep.
And
flick it around.
Yeah, flick it around and you're good.
That looks better.
Okay. Perfect.
All right. So this is quite a new piece of technology, so bear with us if we do have any of these teething issues, but hopefully that's the last of the technical difficulties. If there are any technical difficulties going through though, please do get in touch with Emma. So if you can't make a session or if you're logged out for whatever reason, as Ken mentioned, we are recording it. So at the end of the session, we will upload this just so you have access at a later date, just in case anything does go wrong. However, we just wanted to point out a few of the features that these Zoom webinars hold. So during the session, if you want to ask any questions, there's two kind of main ways to do that, which is through the chat feature or the Q&A. And it looks like we've already got a few people that have got stuck into that, which is good to see. So you can feel free to air any of your questions through there. We may not be able to get through it in this presentation. However, we can take it on board and hopefully get back to you with responses to that. We'll also have gaps or pauses where we can take some time to go through those questions. So if there's anything that you don't quite understand during the presentation today, feel free to jot down those as notes in those two functions. If the tech does fail, you can use the PDF slides that have been provided on the memory stick. Hopefully that's arrived, but if not, you can download that off our Moodle platform, which I'll speak to in a second. You can also dial in from your phone. So using the area code, which I believe is 03, the same as Victoria here, or ask questions via text to Emma. So that's Emma who will be moderating today. And if you may have noticed her background, she is standing in the, what do we call it? It's the
Called the prize pit, Max.
prize pit. That's right. And why is it called the prize pit, Emma?
Oh, because if anyone asks really, really amazing questions and interesting questions, or has answers to any of your questions, Max, or our polls, you can give away some prizes.
Well, that's pretty good incentive to be vocal in this forum and
absolutely,
to ask some good questions. So thanks, Emma.
Yep.
Ken has already touched on himself. This was obviously an earlier photo. This was pre-mustache days. He's now got a beautiful handlebar mustache, and that's me on the right there with a funny little mustache. I used to work over in Scotland and did lots of cycling over there as well. And believe it or not, they've got some interesting treatments over there for such a cold and wet climate, but they've adopted some of the European standards, which is good to see. I've been cycling for many, many years now and definitely working within the cycling design space, both from a construction point of view, from a consultant point of view where I am now, and also on the state government side. I used to work for Vic Roads or the Department of Transport. So had a lot of experience in this space, and I've come across many of the issues that I'm sure designers out there are currently facing, and like to, at the moment, I provide a range of guidance and advice and things like that for different projects pertaining to cycling infrastructure. As touched on before, our learning management system is called Moodle, which is a funny little name, but it's just a way that we can store all of the resources and material for this cycling infrastructure course. And it's also where we upload things like quizzes and any other relevant information. So everything to do with this course is all stored here. So hopefully everyone's got an email already asking to sign up to Moodle. If there's any issues with that, I would recommend getting in touch with Emma, as she's more of a Moodle expert than myself. And you will see after today, there's going to be a few extra uploads that we had hidden, but we will now reveal, which we might show at the end of this presentation, just so everyone can see what that looks like and what we're trying to share with everyone. Okay, and another means to make sure that everyone's engaged throughout these presentations. I understand it can be challenging to remain focused for the hour and a half when it's basically just a lot of speaking and lots of slides. So we've put this little fellow in here, and his name is Wally the Wombat. And what we ask participants to do is, you will see this sign dotted throughout the presentation. He'll be somewhat hidden, but somewhat not too challenging to find. So he's not going to be microscopic. You don't need the magnifying glass out or anything like that. But what we ask participants to do is tally up the amount of times they come across Wally the Wombat, and it will actually be a quiz question. How many times did you spot Wally? You won't find Wally in your presentation pack. So if you think, oh, well, I don't really need to pay attention now, I can just click through the slides later and I'll find him then and count them up. Unfortunately, we didn't include them in the packs that you guys have got. So it gives us extra incentive to be attentive now to make sure that you're counting Wally, and it will be a question in the quiz, as I mentioned. So it will come in handy. And just as a note, yeah, this first Wally is not included in the count. So you don't need to get the tally marker out just yet, but he'll be on the way. In order to successfully complete this training course and gain the certificate, attendance for all the webinars are compulsory. And if you are unable to make a session, then we just ask that you attend online. So you at your own pace, when you get the chance, just download the recording and view that in your own time. Satisfactory completion of all set tasks. So we have 2 quizzes as well as 2 exercises and assignments, one of which involves a site visit. So we ask all of those tasks are completed to satisfaction, and we will be marking those individually. So you will get feedback on that as well in case there's any issues with that. And achieving a minimum 80% pass mark on all the quizzes and assignments. So we do allow 3 attempts with one-on-one coaching if it's required. So don't be shy to reach out if you're having any troubles with the quizzes or you didn't get it right the first time and you're not sure why it was incorrect. Just reach out and we can provide that one-on-one coaching. So that's a lot of the administrative things that we wanted to go through. I can now happily share our first session, which is going to be discussing shared paths and off-road facilities. So I'll just let that fellow just cycle across there. Things that we're going to be really talking about in today's session include the design of shared paths. So things that you're looking at is the path width, the gradient of the path, the hazards and how far the clearance needs to be for those hazards and how you protect cyclists from those hazards. Maintaining sight lines, both of the horizontal geometry and vertical geometry, as well as fencing. We'll then jump into the next component of this session, which will be shared paths crossing roads. We'll provide a few examples of what is considered best practice, which is providing a priority for cyclists. We'll discuss that dreaded topic of bollards and what else we can do instead of putting these sticks in the ground and hoping cyclists don't hit them, as well as briefly touch on some DDA requirements where you are crossing roads. And the final kind of component of today's module will be shared paths, crossing shared paths, which is an often oversighted area of this design aspect. So we'll talk about things like wayfinding signage and how to actually manage where you've got 2 different paths combining or merging across. How do you manage the speeds to make sure cyclists aren't just running into each other or running into pedestrians as well? So without further ado, we can get stuck into our shared path design. So this example that I've got here is, sorry, Ken, you've just unmuted. Did you have something to add?
I was just going to say, Max, it might be good to just pause and see if anybody's got any questions about the logistics, the running, how they do things.
That's a good point. Yeah. Any questions that have come through so far, Emma?
Nothing yet. There were a couple of people raised their hand right at the beginning. If you do having any trouble or anything like that, just pop it in the chat and I can assist you as we go. Yeah, raising their hand just means I can unmute you to talk, which, you know, there may be capacity for that later on or in a later session. But at the moment, if you could just pop your question in the chat function or the Q&A, and I can help you from there.
And there is a question that's just come in about
how
to connect to Moodle. And so they should have received an email. Is that right, Emma? Yeah,
that's correct. Last Tuesday, I uploaded everyone to Moodle. Have a look in your spam folder or that kind of thing, or your junk. It can often go there. If you haven't received an email, certainly send me an email, and I can reset your password and send all the details through again to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we can go through this all at the end of the session too.
Yeah. And just reiterating, write your questions into the chat at
Yes.
any point. Don't wait for pauses, just as
Yeah.
you're going.
Yep.
And
I'll keep an eye on it.
Emma's going to feed them to Max as we go. And if you really wanted to talk, you'd raise your hand, and then at an appropriate point, Emma would find you and unmute you. Can't turn your camera on, so don't worry about that at all.
That's right. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, fantastic. So here we have a separated bicycle facility where it's actually a fairly good example where we've got this bicycle only facility, which is on the right-hand side. I'll see if I can get my pen up and we can have a look. So this is only for cyclists, this area here, and pedestrians are meant to walk over here along the Esplanade. Doesn't quite work out like that in practice, as pedestrians, as you know, will kind of meander wherever they feel like it and wherever is most convenient, but that is the intent, to actually separate a lot of this commuter cycling traffic away from pedestrians who are just walking along the waterfront there. So that's just an example of separating these two vulnerable road users. If we hop into our Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 6A, which is provided on the resources within your memory stick, and it's also provided online in Moodle. They provide this diagram here, which is trying to give designers a little bit of information about what type of path features to construct depending on how many cyclists, so the number of cyclists two-way per peak hour. So it's important to note that that's the peak hour. It's not just any hour. It's not just the AADT divided by 24 or anything like that. So during peak times, we're considering the population of pedestrians and the population for cyclists. It should be noted that if you're operating in a kind of greenfield environment, those values will basically have to be assumed or estimated, because you won't have existing counts that can kind of illustrate those points. But this graph represents different types of cycling infrastructure to implement. So where you've got kind of low volumes of both cyclists and pedestrians, this 3 metre shared path is typically considered appropriate, which is a very common arrangement that we see throughout Australia and New Zealand. As you get into higher volumes of pedestrians, you can see the bike path width increases and in relation to the footpath width, which remains at fairly standard 1.5 metre. So we're on the other side of the spectrum, where you've got incredibly high volumes of both cycling traffic and pedestrians. They're kind of recommending this 4 metre wide bike path and a 4 metre wide footpath as well, which is probably not that common, but it's something that should be considered depending on exactly how many cycling and pedestrians are operating within that space. Another way that path widths are commonly designed for is using this little table, which is also taken from the Austroads Guide, which refers to this idea of a local access path, which is shown in this diagram here. A regional path, more commonly referred to as a commuter path, and a recreational path. So you can see as I go along this table, the minimum widths are increasing. So you've got 2.5, 3 metres, and 3.5. There is also this minimum width with typical maximum, which is actually below it. So it's saying a 2 metre width. This is a fairly rare example. There's fairly limited application where you'd consider a 2 metre width appropriate for both cyclists and pedestrians. So here's an example which is considered a local access path, which is meant to cater for pedestrians and cyclists going in both directions. And you can see two friends here, or potentially enemies, I don't know these people, walking side by side. They take up the entire facility for both directions and for cyclists, which makes it, if you were a cyclist and it was just one pedestrian trying to walk and trying to overtake them, the amount of clearance that you actually have with your handlebars and trying to overtake them is fairly marginal. And if that's perhaps a person walking a dog or something like that, that is known to zigzag across the path, as my dog does, that just does not allow a lot of room for error. So although that minimum width there is stated as 2 meters, it's not a very great outcome for anyone involved, for pedestrians or cyclists, if you are providing that narrow width. For regional paths, or as I mentioned, these are typically more commuter cyclists. In other words, they're basically more attracting cyclists getting from A to B and providing a very strategic function. You do have this increased width, but what is not probably as common is people with prams or pedestrians using that as a place for themselves. That's the main distinguishing factor between the regional path and the recreational path, which has, you can see here, it's just got more activity. It's used by all types of road users, and yes, there's just a variety of different applications for that. So if you want more examples of exactly how these cross sections look, I'd recommend just having a look in Appendix A of that Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 6A, and it just provides a little bit more information about how they actually define these different facilities and where they may be appropriate. Okay, so that brings us up to gradients. As I'm sure anyone that has been on the saddle before, cycling uphill, or has also read my introduction note, cycling uphill can often be a bit of a bane to the existence of cyclists, and some find it incredibly exciting and it's all part of the fun. Others would avoid the route completely because they don't want to have to cycle uphill. So this figure here, it really kind of represents that in a much more scientific means. And it's basically stating that as our gradients, which is, how steep the hill is basically, depending on how steep it is, you can only have a certain length of that gradient where it just becomes intolerable to just everyday cyclists. So typically for shared paths, you're catering for cyclists aged between 8 and 80. So if you think of, if anyone's got young children out there, but try and think of a young child cycling along, starting with an incredibly steep gradient. How long would it be before they pack it in and think, that's just no fun? I don't appreciate that. So just as an example, there's two kind of thresholds that they use in the Austroads Guide, which is acceptable and desirable. If we were looking at a 10% grade, which is very steep, you would note that even walking, that is not a comfortable grade at all. They're saying at a 10% grade, a desirable kind of length for that grade is 10 meters. So it's basically saying if you've got a 10% grade, you've got something really, really steep, you need a really short section of that before it starts to plateau or flatten out, because cyclists just won't use that unless they're really, really into uphill gradients, which some cyclists are, but probably not appropriate for shared paths. Here's an example of kind of that in practice, but we're actually looking at downhill. So the general guidance is that gradients steeper than 5% should not be provided for downhill grades, which, in that previous example of the 10%, that if you went the other way, that wouldn't really meet that criteria, because you generally try and get grades lower than 5%. But this is an example of where this is actually not only just an issue in terms of providing good infrastructure for cyclists, but it's actually a safety concern as well. So in this example here, there's a bridge that goes over a road or an overpass, and then cyclists travel along down here. And there's also another shared path which connects kind of basically at the base of this ramp. You can imagine if you were cycling down this hill, which I can confirm does have a gradient steeper than 5%, the ability to actually brake is fairly limited, and the ability to pick up pace is extremely viable. So you are kind of traveling down here at speeds, I would expect, greater than 30 kilometers per hour. And that's not someone who is a confident cyclist. That's just good old plain physics, because you are being brought down at speed to engage with the rest of this path here. And given that you've got this physical barrier being the fence here, your ability to see the shared path which kind of connects behind this tree here is extremely limited. In other words, you're coming down here at speed and someone else could be coming ready to join that path. If you see them too late, or they happen to come into your lane right in front of you, your ability to maneuver around them is fairly limited. So this is an important example of where the gradient is actually not just, as I mentioned, something that's important to consider from, making sure that it's a comfortable ride for cyclists, but it also affects safety as well. Like, do you actually have the ability to stop in the event that something like this happens? So it is an important thing to consider as you're doing shared path design. This next little image all relates to the operating width of a cyclist. So typically we see an operating width of this 1 meter. So it's 750 mil roughly of the handlebars, and there's just a little bit of clearance either side of that. And that is to take into account a little bit of left and right as you're pedaling. However, it's important to note that Austroads does recognise that not all cyclists can steer in a straight line, particularly when cycling uphill. And experienced riders will actually work the bicycle from kind of side to side, so that you may get a little bit more wobble. So Austroads acknowledges that this 1 meter envelope should actually be increased to 1.5 meters. So it's actually probably a little bit wider than you'd expect. If you just look at the width of the bicycle, you're almost doubling that. And that's considered kind of that design envelope. Other kind of important things to consider here are head clearances. So there's actually a 200 mil. I've seen that go up to 500 mil in different guidelines, but 200 mil is bare minimum. And that's above the height of the bicycle and rider. So that's 2.4 meters above the ground. And that would be particularly relevant where shared paths go under bridges or any overpasses or things like that, ensuring that there's an adequate height there so cyclists aren't, obviously clipping the top of their head or the like, or having to duck to get under there. And the other kind of little note that I'd like to take from this graphic is just the clearance, which once again, there's a little bit of a range here, which goes from 0.2 meters to 0.5, 0.2 being the minimum. And I would only say that that's the minimum where you actually have a smooth, continuous hazard. And that might include, a fencing system that's actually been designed for cyclists, which we will touch on later. But if you've got a 200 mil clearance between, say, a tree or a utility pole, something that's fixed and would not be particularly forgiving, it's not a lot of room to be able to, particularly for inexperienced cyclists, to be able to, comfortably ride past, because you may inadvertently clip your handlebars, which could result in a further collision or, just coming off your bicycle. So that minimum of 0.2 meters is generally not employed too much, unless, as I mentioned, that is a smooth surface. The 0.5 meter, that desirable, is more typically taken as the distance that you want away from the edge of your cycle lane to whichever hazard you've got there.
Excuse me, Max, we just have a couple of questions and comments.
Let's go for it.
Yeah, we've got one. Does increased e-bike use impact the gradient charts/thresholds?
I'm sure Austroads are looking at incorporating how the e-bike population will influence those things. However, I would suspect at this early stage that when we're doing these shared path design, we are looking at a whole range of different cycle users, from, mum and dads with the little kid bike trailer in the back, and to the e-bikes, to, biker clad very eager cyclists. So there's a whole range of factors that come into it. I haven't seen any research that would state that we should be changing these gradient values based on the, the increased usage of the gradients. And I'm not sure I would support that either, because we're not quite at the stage where we're only building cycle paths for e-bikes. We are trying to make these as accommodating for, as I mentioned, ages 8 to 80. So it's an interesting consideration. Unless you knew of a particular route that was exclusively used for e-bikes, I'd certainly still take that existing graph into consideration. Good question though. Anyone, anything else, Emma?
Yeah, we've just got a comment. Must be relevant for universal access for people with disabilities too. That's a good comment. Yep. Is the clearance from walls, etc., from the width of the handlebars or from the wheel? Could a fence taper out?
Could a fence taper out? So the width of the, I think I might take that one offline just to confirm I've got that correctly in my head, but I think I understand what that means. So this operating width is taken from the center of the bicycle there. So you see you've got the 1 meter there. So you've got a 0.5 meter to the edge of that cyclist envelope, and then it's considered either that 0.2 or that 0.5 meters to that hazard. So that's that distance there. So it's not quite the edge of the bicycle. There's a little bit of extra leeway room there to account for that. But I'll follow that up after the presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Max.
Okay, so I'll just jump into some common hazards that we see out there on shared paths. This one's a classic one. I'm not entirely sure why they decided to build the bin right in the middle of the bicycle path there and not just have a little built out area, something like this, more common, but that's just classic design. This is the edge of the concrete paths. That's about 125 mil thick pavement, and instead of battering up straight to the edge of the pavement, they have just kind of left it as is and thought that was good enough. So if a cyclist were to come off at this location, the ability for them to kind of correct their movement and get back onto the path is incredibly limited. Instead, you're going to run into these rocks, and you don't really, unless you've got a mountain bike, you've got not a lot of hope of trying to climb up onto that section there. Here's another little hazard, which is a little bit more hidden. It's hidden by this vegetation here, but the edge of the path is kind of along here. And this is certainly not even 200 mil. This is basically right at the edge of the path, is a utility pole, which is not at all well delineated. So cyclists would not really be able to see that until perhaps it's too late. And you could imagine if you've got a cyclist kind of coming in this direction, or maybe it's a person with a dog walking along and the dog decides to, come over here, you're pushed further and further closer to this utility pole, and it doesn't take much, just a tiny little clip of the pole, and that's basically you off your bicycle. So there's a few things you consider in this example, which would be to delineate around the pole, so you could actually deliberately narrow it, something like this, just to show that there is a hazard there. Or in an ideal world, you'd remove the hazard altogether if you've got the money to kind of do those things, which I understand it's not a perfect world. Here is an example of how that hazard can be actually delineated. This is a reasonably good example. It's not perfect. For those who are following along at home or have access to the slides, I've included in several of our presentations this little source, which I'm sure everyone's been noticing change as we go through it. But there's also just a link here, which if you click on that, it will take you to the actual Google Maps of that particular location. So you can click on that, have a little look around how the road environment looks and how the bicycle path looks and things like that, just so you can actually use that at a later date if you choose to, or if that that single snip isn't quite clear. It gives you opportunity to have a little play in your own time. But what's actually used here is these flexible bollards with kind of delineation or delineators on them. So it makes it clear that, you know, to cyclists that something's coming up, and you can see that the path narrows. There's a little bit of edge line marking. All of these are not, you know, primary or the best treatment that you could do. This was a reasonably new construction. This occurred maybe 2 years ago, and I'm just bewildered why they didn't just put this footing, you know, closer into the vegetation there, and then you've got don't have to worry about any of this kind of stuff. So this was, I would say, an afterthought. You know, this is not an example of the best practice cycling design, but they have made some attempt at least to delineate that hazard. So I should just confirm this is a gantry. So there's like a pole that comes up, and then there's a sign that comes across like that. So that's a gantry column. Okay, so that drives us next into sight lines. So there's two main, and apologies, I know this is quite technical and perhaps not relevant to everyone in the group, but just wanted to show that there is actually a fair bit of calculation and rigor behind these things if people are interested in it, designers. So stopping sight distance for those in that space, it's a very commonly used term, and it's basically how far away does an object need to be or for me to be able to sight it and to stop as a cyclist. So that thing could be, you know, a stick on the ground that's going to trip me up, or it could be a snake that I don't want to run over. And so there is actually a calculation to do that to make sure you've got enough time and space to stop there without having to collide with that. The coefficient of friction, there's a very similar equation used for typical traffic engineering or, you know, general motor traffic. Coefficient of friction for cyclists in wet conditions is 0.16, which I would always just take the worst case scenario. There's no point taking the dry conditions. It is eventually one day going to get wet, so you may as well take that into account. And that will give you your stopping sight distance if you take in, if you use that formula. This one is for the vertical geometry. Once again, this is probably a little bit too technical for just general practitioners, but it's just wanted to show that, you know, there is a lot of thinking out there to calculate these kind of things. And it's basically, you know, if you've got a gradient, this is very overdone here, but a cycle path where you go up on a hill and you're here, can you actually see something that's over here on the ground, or does that crest block your vision? So things to consider like that. So there are actually a rigorous way to calculate these kind of things. And I will provide an example so you don't need to get too worried about these calculations. Here is this horizontal curvature kind of demonstrated graphically, or sorry, in this little image here, where, as I mentioned, if you were the cyclist traveling around this bend, apologies for that poor curve, are you able to see this object, which could be a hazard to you, and that's sitting on the path? Or is this kind of vegetation here going to block your line of sight? So that's the reason it's kind of used. And here's a practical example. So if I was a cyclist, this is, believe it or not, a sealed pavement. It looks like gravel, but it is sealed. So you can get, you know, 25, 30 kilometers per hour cycling speeds along here, and you're traveling this way. Something that's hidden behind that bush, you basically have no idea that it's there. And if you're traveling at speed, once again, your ability to stop, you will already have to be slowing because of the curve, but ideally you'd like to see any hazards that are well and truly in advance before, you know, having to apply any emergency braking maneuvers. So just something else to consider when you're doing shared path design is how this vegetation will actually grow. And, you know, if it's going to be tall like this and block lines of sight, well, perhaps, you know, just making sure that it's away from that or closer to the center of the radius rather than closer to the path. So you've got increased opportunity to see those hazards. Okay, fencing. Fencing is another really interesting topic. There's a couple diagrams that Austroads use to define when fencing is actually required. One has got to do with the actual vertical drop. So if you've got just like a gap next to your shared path, and they're saying if X, so your distance from the edge of the path to wherever that drop is, if that's less than 2 meters, but Y, so the Y is the actual drop itself, is less than 0.25 meters or 250 mil, it says the fence is not required. And people may read that and think, oh, hang on, so you're saying I can build a path and the edge of the path is here, and then there's a meter, and then there's a 200 mil gap like that, and that's okay. You've got to be careful. There's a little asterisk there which says batter off the surface when 1 meter, within 1 meter of the path. So what's that saying is use a batter, something like this, and fill that in. So you've got, rather than use a fence, which is not always a fantastic thing to put in, instead just use earth and natural batter material to fill that in. There's also 2 different kind of tiers of fencing. One is called the partial barrier fence, and the other is called full barrier fence. And I've got a couple of examples to show you of both. But basically, the kind of limits of both is partial is where you think, there is a hazard located adjacent that shared path. However, it's not quite as serious as where the full barrier fence is. So a full barrier fence would be required where it's kind of like a cliff. If you went through that fence, you would seriously injure yourself. It's quite an underutilized little table. There's plenty of shared paths that I've passed where there's no fences at all, and that would definitely meet these criteria. So something that's, I would say, often forgotten when designing these kind of shared paths and cycle facilities. The other figure that I just wanted to bring to attention is got to do with the steepness of the adjacent batter. So this is all to do with, this is more like if it's a cliff. So if you've got something looks more like this, you obviously don't want to be cycling too close to that, and that's where a fence would be appropriate. Just checking at the time, I seem to be going okay for time, but I might just skip through this because there's plenty of talk about fencing, but just wanted to briefly touch on the 2 different types and how to actually interpret this information. So, as mentioned, partial barrier system is this one here, and you can see the main difference between that and the full barrier system is the amount of these kind of vertical bars that go in between them. Basically, if you tried hard enough, I would think that you could actually get through the partial barrier fence, whereas this full barrier fence is basically going to stop anything at that level. The other really important part about cycling fences is a smooth rail. So it's clearly indicated on both of these designs. The reason that we want a smooth rail is because if you've got any little bits that jut out, they're very easy to clip a handlebar on. Whereas the way that these kind of cycle-friendly fences are designed is, as you're cycling along, this smooth rail is designed to kind of hit in between your shoulder and your wrist. So instead of your handlebars clipping it, it's up higher. And the idea is you kind of collide on these smooth rails and then get deflected along the path and hopefully manage to stay on your bicycle. If in comparison you had something with, a rounded post, kind of that implement at different intervals, the odds of actually just hitting a post, having a blunt kind of reaction to that, you're more likely to turn your handlebars in and potentially go over and then over the fence as well. So there's one thing I'll get you to take away from these cycle fencing is smooth rails, incredibly important. Here is another example of the fencing. So as I mentioned, longitudinal fences with rounded posts and smooth railings, that one gets the tick. Fences or bollards with curving towards the right or sharp points. Yeah, I can't imagine where you'd be putting sharp points next to a shared path, but that kind of gives me nightmares. Also low fences. So anything really, really low down that can actually impact your pedals as well. It's also a little bit more challenging to sight as well. So that could include things like garden beds and things like that. Need to consider those as well. So this is an actual opportunity where I might just pause and I will ask Emma if she could please log on to module 1, hole 1, because I believe we've got a question that I'd like to pose for all our participants.
Okay, no problem. We've just got a quick comment too, Max. So just as long as not painted with shark skin paint that abrades your skin, that takes your skin off, like on a Tasman bridge.
Ooh, that doesn't sound very...
It doesn't, does it?
No.
Okay, I will launch the poll, Max.
I generally find anything with sharks in the title is something to avoid. So that's just ringing bells with me already. Thank you, Emma. So the one is stating, should fencing be installed along this shared path? So hang on, let me just get rid of this little title there for you. There we go. We'll just jot him down there. And the question is, should fencing be installed along here? So while everyone has a chance to contemplate that and answer yes or no, I'll kind of draw in what the question's asking there. So we've got a little proposed fence like this, you know, and we'll put in our smooth railing, very, very important. Whoop, that's him over there. So,
Max, just for you to be aware, there's a little bit of a lag in when you draw things, and
okay.
it's not too bad.
That's frustrating, but thank you, Ken.
Not too bad, but just...
That's my very basic proposed fencing along this shared path, and I'd be interested to hear whether you think this is required in this instance or whether we leave it as is.
Okay.
Have the answers come through?
Yeah, we're at 100%, so I will end the poll. There we go.
And how do we go, Emma?
Would you like me to share the results? So
yes, please.
There we go.
Okay, so I've got 9% saying yes, we should have fencing along there, and 91%, so the vast majority, saying no, that we should not. Okay, very interesting results. I would tend to agree with the no, we should not. Although there are some hazards, being that we do have, you know, the poles and the like. This small vegetation could also potentially be a hazard. However, given this actual context, your sightlines here are excellent. There is actually a wide facility here, so it's not as if you're in a narrow, constrained environment. And if you were to kind of cycle off the path here, you're not kind of going to then fall onto, you know, a cliff face or something that's quite painful. It's basically a garden bed. So it's not an instance where I would consider fencing to be required. However, there may be merits further along the route where there are more significant hazards. So you would have to kind of apply that section by section, and you couldn't just do that as a blanket rule, no fencing along here whatsoever. But thanks everyone for your feedback on that one. I just wanted to talk about this example in particular. Let me just erase my pretty little drawing, and we'll have a look exactly how the shared path crosses the road. So this is an example where we've got a divided carriageway. So we've got 2 lanes of traffic heading along that way, and it's difficult, but in the other kind of corner, there's 2 lanes of traffic heading that way. There's also a tram line that heads in both directions, either side of this median. And right in the center of the median, you've got this beautiful shared path. So a few things to note is where the shared path crosses this vehicle crossover point, or this road here, the cyclists actually have the priority. You'll see there's no change in the condition to the pavement. There's no give way signs for the cyclists. Cyclists just travel straight through. And what the vehicles have to do, you can kind of see on the edge there's a stop line. In other words, motorists have to stop and give way to pedestrians and cyclists using that shared path. The other really good example about this particular shared path is that it's raised as well. And the importance of raising these crossing points is immense, and something you'll hear me state along the journey of our 4 modules is how important it is raising these crossings. So the importance of it kind of comes down to you're lowering the vehicle speeds. So vehicles will have to slow down. It's not as if there's just a sign there that says give way. There's give way and they have to slow down because there's a physical barrier in their place, being that it's raised, there's a hump in the road. So there'll be lower speeds, which makes their alertness, motorist alertness higher. And also, should a collision occur, generally the severity of that accident would be lower compared to if that was just an at-grade intersection. And the other thing to point out with these raised crossing points is as the cyclists and pedestrians are higher, they're more in line with the motorist line of view. So it's easier to spot cyclists and pedestrians when they're actually raised up on a higher table. And that's just once again a means of reducing the likelihood of a collision occurring in the first place. So I'm a big fan of raising these crossing points wherever you can, giving cyclists a priority as well, because it makes the cycling journey a lot more appealing and a lot safer as well. So I've got a couple examples here of how this can actually look in other environments. So this is a give way example on the left here. This one's provided in Melbourne with cyclists given priority there across the threshold. And this second example is in Brisbane. And this one's not quite as fantastic. I'm happy to receive any tips why I wouldn't be recommending this second example as well. So I'll just open up that to the chat. If anyone wants to throw out any ideas why they think I like the first one better than the second one.
Well, there's just a question. Could you also add a zebra crossing?
You certainly can. You can put a zebra crossing adjacent the bicycle path as well, which has been done before. It's just a matter of how big you want that table. Often there is, kind of extents or constraints how wide you can make the table on top there, both in terms of, construction costs and also just then you've got a risk of kind of vehicles propping on that table there as well. Any feedback on the second example there, Emma?
Yeah, sight distance looks pretty crappy. Have to look over the shoulder in the chicane and reduce speed to almost needing to stop.
Ah, there we go. Can we get a prize for that having to look over the shoulder response? That's exactly what I was after. Yeah. So if you're a cyclist traveling along here and you're meant to do this kind of zigzag or S bend, and you want to maintain speed, it's very, very, very difficult to be able to look back and sight traffic that are hopefully going to give way to you. However, we can't just assume that they are. So you do kind of need to slow down and sight anyone that's potentially about to cross that environment. So this is not such a fantastic example because it's just incredibly difficult to achieve that. And what's more likely to happen is cyclists will just go through there and hope for the best, which is relying on motorists to always be 100% adhering to the road rules at all times, which just doesn't quite work out like that. So much bigger fan of ones that come across at these perpendicular angles rather than this angled approach here. I'm also, sorry, Emma.
Oh, I was going to say one more question, which is how would you design it? So I'm sure you're going to get to that, Max.
Yes. Okay. So if it is possible, and it may not be as ideal for a cyclist, but if you can square up this path across here, there's way too many little drawings now, annotations. Sorry, I really like my annotations. But if you can square up this crossing point, something like this, and then that continues along there, and that continues along there. That's meant to be 90 degrees. I know my drawing doesn't quite show that. And so while that does mean cyclists now need to kind of slow at a much more significant angle, at least now you're providing that sighting distance there, and the ability to focus on oncoming traffic is a lot more improved. So that's kind of how or what I recommend to design in this situation.
Yeah. Just one last comment on this would be, you would have to assume design constraints have led to the design of this, the design it is. Squaring it up might require cyclists to slow down even further.
Yeah, I completely agree. And perhaps we're unaware of particular design constraints. I kind of assume that they put it this way to maximize the flow of cyclists, but perhaps there is something that we are not aware of, and a reason that they've designed it for this. So good questions though. I'll hop on to the next slide, which is, yes, the dreaded topic of bollards, where we've got a few different examples here, and there's plenty of different products out there that facilitate this need. Some, they've got this little yellow and black tape and hope that's good enough to be able to see that there's a hazard there. Others kind of blend in perfectly with the surrounding environment, which is a really awful thing for cyclists. This one, at least one of the three, has got a little bit of retro-reflective tape, which makes it a little bit easy to see in low light conditions, but the other two are, good luck. We've got some kind of chicane treatments, and this one here in Hobart as well. This is a fairly common treatment that I've seen in Hobart when you're approaching roads. And I suppose I'll start just by saying that generally the idea of these is obviously to reduce the risk of any motor vehicles travelling along that shared path or turning onto the cycle path, which I get it, totally. That's definitely required. But there's several examples that I've come across as a cyclist and as an auditor where there's no way a vehicle could possibly enter this environment. So what is the point of that bollard being there? So the first thing I would suggest when analysing whether a bollard, where to put the bollard is it even required? Like, is a vehicle able to travel there in the first place? If you're in the middle of a park, and maybe there's maintenance vehicles that use that track, but is it really worth putting the bollard there, which is a hazard for cyclists? Or can you just train maintenance vehicles to, obviously, they're the only ones that can access that, and to be mindful of cyclists within that space? I would assume that they've already got training to do that. So yeah, my first point of contact is to really just highlight, is there actually a need for the bollard? And I do talk about what else we can use there. So just hang with me. The reason that it is a hazard, I just wanted to bring up this example here. So here is one that's previously installed on a very popular commuter bicycle route in Melbourne. And we've got this fellow here who collided with it. He collided with it when it looked like this. After he collided with it and went to the newspaper, the council went out, gave it a fresh can of spray paint and put some retro-reflective tape on it. You can see the little spray mark grounds still fresh there on the ground. But this fellow here, he collided with this bollard and suffered 3 broken bones in his wrist, as well as facial injuries. And he called the ambulance, and while waiting for the ambulance to arrive, another 2 riders hit the same bollard. So I include this example to show that bollards are genuinely a risk to cyclists, and they genuinely do cause harm. So there needs to be a very good reason to put them in place. And this is obviously one that has taken its fair amount of cycling trauma, which is challenging, difficult to say, but something to just think about, that they're not just, sticks in the ground and you can just put them there and cyclists can see them and they'll be fine, because there's always the risk that cyclists don't see them, or they think they've got enough room to clear beside them, but they don't, and they clip them, and they do result in serious injuries. So, well, what else can we actually do here? So here's an example of kind of a best practice, what you could look at where you acknowledge that, okay, drivers may want to enter that shared path. What can I do to deter drivers from doing that, which is not a bollard? So this example here provides like a little green wedge in the center here. This is landscaping suitable to prevent entry by motor vehicles. So generally low-level landscaping, but perhaps something that could be quite attractive as well. Maybe, something that could be put in there as a local community group or something like that and maintained. And what this actually means is you no longer have the risk of this fixed hazard right in the middle of a shared path. You've also got this delineation on approach, which kind of drags you away from that little area where there is, where there would have typically been a bollard. So this is typically seen as best practice. And I've got an example on the next slide here of how this could actually look in reality. These bollards here also, although they are installed there, you could say that that could all just be landscapes, with heavy duty bushes or something like that. I feel like this is a fairly reasonable example because these bollards actually have lighting on top of them as well. So they stand out in low light conditions. And just because of the approach angles to this continuation of the shared path, cyclists are already kind of slowing down. So your ability to kind of strike those are fairly limited. The other point in this kind of category I was going to touch on was the DDA requirements for shared paths crossing roads. So importantly, something that's also kind of regularly overlooked is that DDA is still, it's law, and we need to be designing for the requirements for not just cyclists and for pedestrians, but also for people with disabilities, and particularly for low vision, disabilities. So this note number 3, tactile ground surface indicators may need to be installed on the footpath where the bicycle path has priority. So in those instances where I showed before, where the cycle path kind of heads straight across the road, TGSIs, or the tactile ground surface indicators, which for those that are not familiar, it's those little kind of braille blocks that sit on the ground, like that. Those are actually required where the cyclists have priority, because obviously that provides the cue to those with low sights or no sight that they are approaching the road. So although it's on the shared path and although cyclists are crossing it, you still need to provide for people with disabilities as well. So that's just a common kind of forgotten issue. I'll take another little pause here and I'll just check in with Emma to see if we've had any other questions.
We've got a comment. Insufficient space would be one of the constraints and challenges.
The bollards, yes, I would certainly agree. That's very relevant. Yeah, but where there's insufficient space, to then make it even narrower by installing a bollard just rings alarm bells with me. Because if you're acknowledging that this is a narrow environment and you're then putting a hazard there, it wouldn't be considered best practice. Any other questions there, Emma? Or?
Not at this stage, Max. We're good to soldier on.
So this one is another little activity I'd like to get everyone involved with. And this one is called What's Wrong with This Photo? So you can see we've got a very confused cyclist there standing and trying to work out, hang on, there's something going on here that I'm not quite sure about. So let me just get rid of that cyclist. There we go. And we can perhaps jot down in the chats what you would consider is wrong with this photo. And Emma, if you could let me know any of the questions or any of the comments that come through.
Yep, getting lots of good things coming through. Sorry, just going back to give way to the right. I've got some comments. No give way signage. The directions, lots of good things. No right of way. The priority path hasn't been identified by having a holding line on the lower priority path. Lots of things here. Unclear
Yes.
right of way. Maybe priority needs to be better defined. The priority isn't clear. Lots of things. Priority.
Yes.
Who has the right of way? Yeah, lots of great things.
Sounds like everyone's kind of hit the nail on the head there and worked out that this
Yeah.
is not such a fantastic example. Can we give out a prize for the first in there? Because I think all those answers were pretty spot on. So the first responder there, Emma, if we can give them a prize for contributing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So the first point that I'd like to raise here is where we're crossing shared paths with shared paths, we need some signage. We need to know where do these two different routes go to and which route am I going to take? Because what will inevitably happen is, and what happened to me when I was actually cycling this, this is a genuine example, I had to just pause and get out my phone and work out which fork to take because I had no idea where I was. And that's just not a great, not a great thing to have to do as a cyclist. And also it, to some extent, creates a hazard because now I've kind of stopped abruptly and potentially if there's someone behind me following, they could have, rear-ended me kind of collision. However, it's more about just providing facilities and, providing a comfortable journey. So you feel comfortable with where you're going, you know exactly where that's connecting. And this is just a terrible example of that. But the other point that was noted by everyone was just there's no priority either. So if you do have a cyclist kind of coming this way and one coming this way and one coming this way, well, who is giving way to who? Is it just the first in, best dressed, which would basically how that would work, or whoever's the most confident cyclist, they're just going to go for it. So we do prefer to provide a priority leg. So you would typically provide the priority to whichever is the more common route to be taking. So for instance, if most cycling traffic are traveling along in this direction, then perhaps you put a hold line here and a little give way, kind of line marking here, just so cyclists using this more minor leg are aware that they need to stop and give way to the main thoroughfare. So that's genuinely a much better practice. I'm really not sure what was going on here when they started to build this, but clearly an oversight, just a free-for-all, like a cowboy situation. Just on wayfinding signage, there is an entire Austroads report to do with bicycle wayfinding. So if you ever stuck at exactly what you should be providing at particular shared paths, definitely have a flick through there because it's not something that Australia does particularly well, I would think. Every council has a different way that they like to sign things and every state as well for that matter. And I think what's kind of most critical is if you look at a route, from this end, start to the end, as long as that entire route is consistently signed, the actual font and, if it's blue or if it's red or things like that, you can kind of let that slide a little bit. But as long as on that route it's all consistent, if it's different to another route, yeah, that's where you can be a little bit more, there's a bit more freedom to play there. But yeah, if I was cycling, on a creek trail, for instance, and I saw, I knew that I was following the green signs all the way along my routes and it said number 6 and that's where I was going and that's where I knew my destination was. As long as that's consistently applied throughout, I'm happy with that. And if I happen to cycle another creek trail and I knew I had to follow the red signs with the red or star and I knew I had to follow the red star the whole way along, I'm happy with that. We don't quite have a consistent application throughout Australia at the moment, something that other countries do a lot better than us, but at this stage, I want to emphasize just the importance of getting it at least correct along the route, because it's not something we're even doing at this stage. But anyway, just wanted to highlight that report. Do flick through that if you are working within this space. Here's some examples of, I suppose, how things can look, providing, destinations along there. So to make it clear exactly where certain ways go, and also distances. So you basically know how far you've got to cycle before you see things. Here's more international examples, which I think are a lot better practice, where they actually use numbering systems. So you need to know, okay, I follow number 2 all the way, and it takes me to the MCG or to the UTAS, wherever. And similar to this one here in the Netherlands, where they've got, they always use the same color sign, because that just means cycling infrastructure. And then they use numbers as well to determine what particular routes are required. So that's, yes, incredibly important, and it's very frustrating as a cyclist to get to these forks in the road and just kind of have no idea if you're meant to go left or right, or you turn around because you've already missed it, and it's just doesn't make it an attractive experience, and doesn't really make you want to get on the bike again and do that again because you felt frustration. So much better to plan these things out and to have a consistent network. The other thing to consider where shared paths, crossing shared paths, is, well, how do we actually manage the speed at these conflict points? And this is a very relevant issue for those that have been on shared paths as a pedestrian, and you want to cross over, or you want to just walk across, and you're a little bit nervous because of how quickly the cyclists are traveling. Because they can get to speeds of 25, 30 kilometers per hour, and you as a walker are traveling much slower than that. So how do we kind of manage these speeds at conflict points? And there are a couple alternatives out there. These kind of pavement markings to let cyclists know that pedestrians are particularly going to be concentrated crossing at this point. You can provide that as a visual cue. It's something to be shown that you're doing something, I guess. It's not really going to slow a lot of cyclists down, I wouldn't expect. This example here is in Perth, and there is a level crossing. So pedestrians kind of cross along here, straight along there kind of thing. And you can see they've almost set this up like a road intersection, where they've got give way signs, they've got little splitter islands, and it just emphasizes to cyclists, hang on, you need to slow down, because pedestrians are going to be crossing there in numbers, and you need to give way to them. So there is another photo there, which I'll share later on, which shows how this actually looks when it's a busy day and you see the cycling traffic waiting for these pedestrians to cross here. But it's significant, which is why this kind of bespoke treatment has been implemented. Other things you can look at where you really want to manage the cyclist speeds and the conflict points for pedestrians is you can always look to do zebra crossings across the shared path. So just doing this, and what that highlights to both pedestrians and cyclists is that's the designated crossing point. So that's where I need to be extra mindful of pedestrians. I like this solution as well, because that gives, I feel like generally the zebra markings are very well known, but that's pedestrians. So whereas some people, not everyone would perhaps understand what exactly this pavement marking is communicating, this is something that's certainly very bespoke and new, and other people may not have an idea of what exactly that means. Whereas providing those zebra crossings, I genuinely see that as people understand what that means. They need to slow down, pedestrians are crossing here. That is just about the end of my presentation. So I will just close on this end of shared paths. Sorry, Emma?
There was just someone just said that they should have had a pedestrian path in a different colour. And that's, there's a few comments coming in. What about raising the pedestrian crossing to slow the cyclists? zebra crossings are being phased out by traffic engineers for pedestrian access roads. Oh,
I love the idea.
Across roads.
Yes, yeah, particularly across slip lanes as well. I certainly agree with that. I love the idea of raising the pedestrian crossing as well, because then, as before, I spoke about all the beautiful benefits of raising the cyclist priority crossings. If you're raising the pedestrian crossing, then you're forcing the cyclist to slow down because there's a hump in the middle of their path. So they're going to slow down anyway. So I think that's a really sensible solution, and it is used, and I've got examples throughout the modules where you'll see a couple of those, but it's not as common as you would think. Perhaps because pedestrians tend to take a more meandering route and don't always funnel into that one position where they want to cross. But in that instance before, where there is a definite, this is where the crossing point is, I think there would be a strong benefit in raising that pedestrian crossing point. So can we get a prize out for that one as well? That's a really good suggestion, Emma. I like that.
Perfect. Yes, absolutely.
So I just wanted to close on this shared path, which just abruptly ends. Another example of what not to do. And once again, there's the link there in case you want to see what that actually looks like. Have a look around. But it is an approach to a very large, dangerous kind of multi-lane roundabout. So I'm so confused as to why they stopped it there, as there's ample opportunity to use the verge and continue.
You there, Emma?
Yes,
Looks like we might have
I'm
lost.
here. We've lost Max.
Looks like we've lost Max. That's okay. Well, it's right up to the point where we were going to start to explain the activities, I think, that people were going to do, and probably a good time to start explaining why they got a set of virtual reality goggles or a cardboard set of virtual reality goggles in their pack, which hopefully they got. So
Yeah, absolutely. So what I will do, I will share my screen. So I'm logged into Moodle. We do have a couple of questions that I will, if Max gets back online, that I will pose to him as well, because they're quite good.
So the idea, so let me explain as you get that up there, Emma. We obviously can't get there with each of you and go for a ride around your suburbs and look at different infrastructure. So we've created the next best thing, which is that we've ridden a whole lot of different cycling infrastructure with a 360-degree camera, and you're able to use your phone or your desktop, and you are able to then look around from the rider's point of view. Now, with your phone on YouTube, so if you click on the link, actually when you move your phone around, it moves as though your head is moving around in the area. So you put your phone into the goggles, put it on, and then you're moving around and it's like you're sitting on the bike. So Max will probably explain that again. He's appeared again.
Yes.
Emma's already got, well, Emma's got Moodle up. So maybe just a little explanation on Moodle, and then you can go again, Max.
Sorry for that technical difficulty. We nearly made it the whole session. It was so close, but that's the inevitability, Murphy's Law. So yes, for those that haven't seen Moodle before, thank you, Emma, for sharing your screen.
You can see that.
Yes.
Oh, great. So when you log in, you'll be able to see 1 week at a time. We've set it up so that you can just have a look. Now, for some reason, it has been fixed, but as I've shared my screen, the quiz that we will require you to do at the end of the session isn't showing, but when you go in after the session, it will absolutely be there. So, and it's very easy. You'll just hit launch and you'll be able to go through it all. So we have the 360-degree video that you'll just be able to click on, and it will go through. There, I'll just pause it. We don't need to see it. So that will be available too as well.
Can you just pan around as well, just to show everyone, in case you want to do it on the PC?
Yeah, absolutely.
For those that don't have the goggles yet, you can just click on
I
the
might
link
just mute it. Yeah, so you should be
and
able to
then
just, yep.
drag around the image, and you can have a look at the sky, look at all the birds in the air.
What a beautiful day.
Yes, we were blessed. So there's just some extra examples of shared paths crossing roads, one of which is a best practice example and one can do some improvement. And we've asked you as participants to identify which one you'd consider as which, and we'll go through that on Thursday in the next module. So have a look at this video, have a listen to Ken and I, have a little banter, and take a note of which one you think is the best example. Sorry, Emma, I'll let you come with it.
No, I think that's all we need. Oh, here we go. And the quiz is there. So you'll just be able to launch your quiz from here as well. So you just attempt quiz now. So if you just click on that, you'll be able to go through and you'll get 3 attempts to be able to complete that if needed. The other thing that you'll see in the list, it'll be a couple of hours. I will pop today the recording of today's webinar up there, so by the time Zoom sends it to me and I upload it to YouTube, it can be just a couple of hours, so perhaps a bit later today that'll be available. And also Max's slides from today are available as well.
Did we have any final questions that I didn't get to cover before I rudely got kicked out by my internet?
There are a couple of questions did pop up that were I was quite keen to bring up, so I'll just bring those up now. The chat. It was just from a little while ago. Are line marking standards / requirements the same as roads in the case of give way and stops for bike paths?
So there are, in the resources list that were provided, there are specific like StatCon hold lines that are required for bicycle paths. Very, very similar to the ones that are applied on road, obviously just scaled down to account for the smallest size of a shared path in comparison to a road. So I'd use the line markings that are provided in those guidance documents. And yes, that's all been kind of pre-designed and things like that. So those are just standard templates that you can use if you're designing for those.
And Mary's also shared, which I think is very interesting, that Tasmania has a cycle route directional signage manual that was prepared by the state government.
Excellent. So there you go. So sounds like Tassie are ahead of the crowd, certainly doing better than where we are. But I'm sure there's probably opportunities where there are missing links and it could be a little bit confusing when you get to forks if you're meant to go left or right. So something just to consider going forward and ensuring that that manual is included in future projects.
So now, Max, just summarise again what the tasks are for everybody between this session and the next, and step by step, so everybody's clear what should be done and what they're expecting in the next session, please.
Absolutely. So next session will be on-road cycling facilities. So it's going to be a little bit more detailed than today's, and certainly a lot more examples, a lot more slides as well. So apologies if you've already gotten sick of my voice, but there will be a lot to cover, lots of good guidance there, and certainly some scary examples of what's currently being installed out there and what we consider is, meeting guidelines, but perhaps as a cyclist, you wouldn't be cycling that unless you're really confident. But in terms of, homework, so to speak, what's required. So we've got that quiz that Emma mentioned, and there's a week window that we've provided for that quiz. I would kind of recommend to do that sooner rather than later, just because everything will still be fresh in your mind, and things that I touched on today that I kind of highlighted in my speech or made a bit more obvious. You kind of remember that easier if you jump onto that quiz, either today or tomorrow. However, we have allowed that week window. So as long as it's completed by the module 3, which is next Tuesday, then that's that window there. And if you could also, within the window there, or preferably sooner rather than later, I'd love to hear everyone's feedback before Thursday, about the 360 video experience, because that will be question number 1 of the second module of starting the presentation on Thursday. I'm going to be asking exactly how you found it. We're really keen to hear how everyone experienced it and if they felt a little bit nervous cycling or, e-cycling or, what they identified as the risks were. So we will certainly be going through that in detail on Thursday. So if you can have a go at watching that 360 video by Thursday, that'd be fantastic.
Sorry, Ken. I was just going to add a little note about putting the goggles together. We've included instructions in the packs. But one of the things I think that it doesn't say in those instructions is, or that it's not very clear, is that the convex side of the lens needs to face your phone. Otherwise, it can be a bit blurry.
Yeah, good. I was going to ask for some tips on how to do that. And so there's one, and yeah, my phone's a bit big for it. It doesn't quite fit in. So I've just been sort of using the phone like this as a bit of a way to do it. But if your phone fits in there, it can be a really exciting experience. And you can also do it on your desktop, as Emma was doing there, and just zoom around by holding down the mouse and just spinning around. And you're going to get fed quite a few of these 360-degree videos along this journey. So it should be a bit of fun. Now, there was another question I think that might have popped up.
Yes, there was one last question. So cyclists can ride across pedestrian crossings, marked foot crossings, controlled by lights, and children's crossings in Tasmania. The road rules were changed in 2018. I presume that includes zebras?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a tricky situation. I know for Victoria that cyclists are not permitted. Ken, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but cyclists are not allowed to ride across zebra crossing. That's only for pedestrians. So you either need to have a separate bicycle facility next to the zebra, or you create this one shared space, which in the example before I showed how that pavement was all kind of orangey yellow. That's just to define that both pedestrians and cyclists can cross along there. Cyclists aren't required to dismount.
Yeah, the comments coming in that in Tasmania it does appear it's okay to ride across a zebra crossing, which I would love to see in Victoria, because it causes no end of headaches often. Design challenges of trying to accommodate both for the fact that we know just everybody's going to ride across the zebra crossing anyway. It's just the legislation saying that technically they can't, so thus you can't design with that. But that should make things a bit easier in some of the Tasmanian designs in different situations. But I think the principles are really important, is to provide that clarity around priority, the slowing of vehicles down at conflict points, and trying to provide that connectivity for the cyclists to continue through. And I think it's pretty exciting. We're sort of started with off-road shared path facilities, but getting into the on-road and trying to determine how we provide those safe environments where cyclists and vehicles are using the same general road corridor, and how you can play around with space and separate and the like. So lots of exciting and very challenging stuff to come. Anything final there to add? I hope everybody counted their wallies. You get a little bit of tolerance either side of the wally count. So if you we're grabbing a quick coffee or something and missed one, don't get too concerned. You'll still get your mark for
I made mine a bit more ruthless, Ken.
Oh no, mine
was zero tolerance. Yeah, I'm not quite as kind as Ken. I assume everyone was out there with the tallying pen and just paying attention to every slide. So.
All right. Well, you've got 3 guesses at 3 goes at the quiz if you really want to get that 100%. All right, Emma, anything final to add from an admin logistics point of view?
Not at this stage. Feel free to reach out and get in contact if you are having any difficulties with Moodle, or if there's something happening there, or if you need anything at all, or let me know if there's any sessions that you can't make as well. It's no problem.
Yeah, enjoy your 360-degree ride on some crossing points. And thanks for your wonderful contribution there, Max. And thanks for everybody for logging in.
Thanks everyone for joining, and look forward to continuing the conversation on Thursday.
Bye.
Thanks
Have a good
everyone.
day.
Bye.
Bye.